It's dangerous that I'm the one with a clicker, but I want to thank Rabbi Rosen because some of you know that I was going to share words about my trip to Cuba, and then something else happened this week, so I wanted to share words about that. And then it turns out that I led a memorial service on the Cape today, 2 hours away. So I found myself in the car for a substantial amount of time. And so I got you slides very late, so thank you. And I wanted to recite a prayer for America this evening, and I had hoped that it would be on a slide, but it's not. So I ask for your forgiveness. I'm going to recite it at the end of my words so that we can participate during this important week in the life of our country. So as many of you know, I did travel to Cuba last week to prepare for our February congregational trip when 30 members of our community will tour the country and visit the Jewish community there, and most importantly, bring needed medical supplies and basic goods to its citizens. And before leading a congregational trip, I always like to be very familiar with the country. And I had never been to Cuba before. And it didn't take long to realize upon my arrival that while I felt very safe, everyone should know, despite the lack of electricity at times and a lack of food, while tourists are not suffering, the people of Cuba have been suffering under a dictatorship and a failed economy for a very long time. When you go to Cuba, and raise your hand if you've been to Cuba, many people have, it's like you're going back in time. And I have some really cool pictures of me in a '52 Chevy convertible, but I thought that it would be better to show you what most Cubans are really traveling in, which looks like this, or this. You really feel like you're stepping back in time in Cuba. Not only are the cars dated, it feels like time stopped when Batista was overthrown in 1959, but the entire infrastructure is really neglected. The homes are neglected. This is a picture I took out of my cab's window. You can see just the streets are filled. There's little food. There's less internet. Sometimes there's not toilet paper. And sometimes I would go downstairs in our 5-star hotel and they would say in the morning, "Sorry, there are no eggs today for breakfast. We have hamburgers instead." And you learn that whatever food there is, that is what you eat. Each citizen receives from the government 5 eggs per month right now, and 1 pound of white rice, and a couple of other vegetables or fruits that appear. And I took this picture out of the bus window to capture kind of the decrepit nature of the buildings. And then it became my favorite picture the next day when I looked on my iPhone and I zoomed in. And I didn't realize because the bus was moving very quickly, and I just quickly snapped it. But at the bottom right, there's a couple kissing in the picture, which I found deeply moving. Because in Cuba, despite the pain and the hardship, there's still love and music and art and joy. And that's what I look forward to sharing with members of our community in February. I went to one restaurant. It was actually the restaurant that Obama visited. So I felt like if it was good enough for Obama, I should go. It turns out that that night, the U.S. Embassy staff was there. There's still a U.S. Embassy, despite the embargo. And I say that Obama was there because with the embargo, he's the only president that's been there since Kennedy had imposed the embargo on Cuba. And the waiter, first of all, was a little strange. He said, "You're the Jews." It wasn't meant to be negative at all. The Jewish community is fully welcome, but evidently my government-sponsored guide, when he made the reservation, said, this is from a rabbi group. So he came up friendly, but you're the Jews, which was an interesting welcome. He said, how's your stay in Cuba? And we shared, parts are difficult. And he said something. He said, welcome to Cuba, where nothing is guaranteed, but everything is possible, which I loved. So I'm glad I went, and I want to thank my clergy partners for covering, because I learned a lot about Fidel and Che and the Cuban Revolution. I learned a lot about the Jewish community, and especially Meyer Lansky, the Jewish mobster who wanted to make Havana Las Vegas, befriending Batista along the way. I learned a lot about the embargo, the economic conditions, the inflation, state control. But the most important thing I learned, once again, was that I was really glad to come home to America, where we have so much food in our country that sometimes we even throw it away. And I returned on Monday evening to perhaps the greatest we Americans share, which is that we vote, that we live in a democracy. And we all know from history that democracy needs to be protected. This week marks the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, November 9th, 1938, when the Nazis destroyed synagogues and Jewish homes, demonstrating how fragile democracy is, that we can't take democracy for granted. A free press, a robust debate, the protection of minorities. Democracy has to be protected. And on this weekend of Veterans Day, we remember those who protected democracy with bravery and courage and selfless devotion, sometimes even giving their lives. May their memories always be a blessing. Now, this obviously has been a complicated week for our country. Some in our community are rejoicing at the outcome of the election. Others are saddened, even fearful, even distraught. But we must now come together as Americans and recommit ourselves to the democratic ideals that we share and help preserve our democracy in the face of uncertainty. For that is the gift of democracy as well. With the transition of power comes uncertainty. And the good news is that we as a Jewish people have faced uncertainty before. We know how to do it from the very beginning of the Torah, the Parsha, our weekly portion this week, when Avram, who eventually would become Abraham, faced a great deal of uncertainty when in chapter 12 God says, Lech lecha, go forth to a land that I will show you. Avram has to go forth to a land with no idea what's in store. He had never seen pictures. He had no internet, and he certainly had no rabbi making a journey to spy out the land before him. But God said, Lech lecha, go forth, and Avram did. And God didn't just say, Lech lecha, he said, Me'artzecha, from your native land, Me'beit avicha, from your parents' house. Avram was losing everything he had ever known. Not only was he facing uncertainty, but he was facing displacement. And he was confronting this challenge not from a strong place of joy or energy, because the last verse in last week's Torah portion actually tells us that Avram experienced something terrible, the death of his father, Terah. And yet Avram journeyed, despite the pain and the sorrow and the uncertainty, embracing a future with courage and conviction and resilience, walking step after step with open-mindedness and a commitment to positive action, even when the outcomes seem daunting or unclear. Avram walked just as we need to, with family and community, knowing that sometimes it's in the moments of the greatest uncertainty that our greatest growth occurs. For these are the moments that require courage to face ambiguity, resilience to confront instability, and a strong reliance on one's moral compass when the path ahead is not entirely clear. And that is what we must do, whether we are Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, come together as a Jewish community and focus on our moral compass, just as we have always done. You see, this election did not change anything about our synagogue. The mission of TBE does not change based on who was elected president. The immigrants we supported last week still need our support this week. The hungry that we fed last week still need to be fed this week. Israel that needed our love and support last week still needs our love and support this week. The families that send their children for moral education, the adults who are sick or in mourning, still need us to care for them this week as well. We must recommit ourselves to purpose, to our country, to our community, to our democracy, fighting for our rights and our values. Because to quote a wise waiter somewhere in Havana, who may live in a country with little food and electricity or elections, we live in a country where nothing is guaranteed, but everything is possible. And so I hope we recommit ourselves to the vision of the founders of our nation. And so let us all rise on this Memorial Day weekend, the week of our election. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, dear God, bless our nation and its inhabitants. Protect its citizens from all threats, both domestic and foreign. Bring blessing, health, and prosperity from sea to shining sea. Guide our people to walk in your ways as you prophesied to Jeremiah, to act with kindness and justice and righteousness throughout the land. May racism and anti-Semitism, misogyny and homophobia, and all forms of hatred be uprooted from our land. And may you fill our hearts with empathy and love. O God, may you send good counsel to those who are newly elected, so that they might steer our country in a direction that celebrates our common humanity. Impress upon those who have been placed in positions of responsibility that they have the moral obligation to protect the safety and welfare of everyone they serve. And may we always strive to act with a sense of justice and compassion for all, so that our country will always be the land of the free and the home of the brave. And let us all say, Amen.
Let's remain standing for these familiar words. I've actually added another verse courtesy of a local activist, and I hope that you'll join in singing them. Oh no, Rabbi, I got it. I got it. You did a great job, though. I'm really, really pleased. Also, if you aren't familiar, this house is where these words were written by Catherine Lee Bates. It's around the corner on Curve Street in Wellesley, and I had the benefit of actually having many meals there. So let's join together a prayer for America. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed all grace on thee. sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for working folk who forged the wealth we see in farm and till, in home and school, unsung in history. America, America, may race nor sex nor